I'm really chuckling at an article in Slate, the online magazine. It concludes with the following line. In the name of promoting religious liberty, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, is poised to repeal the Establishment Clause itself. Now, whenever I read this kind of over-the-top assertion, I know something great is about to happen. So when the left is freaking out, it usually means that one of their cherished orthodoxies is about to be body slammed by the Supreme Court. And in this case, what's going to be body slammed, I think, delightfully, is their absurd idea that the Establishment Clause, which basically says that the government cannot, quote, establish religion. Quite clearly for the founders, what this meant is that you can't have a national religion. In fact, it didn't even mean that you couldn't have a state religion. Why? Because there were a number of states that had established religions at the time. The Anglican religion was established. So you had these establishments, and the Constitution was not addressed to them. So the idea that government has to be kind of officially hostile to religion, it can have nothing to do with religion, it can offer subsidies, but even though it's offering subsidies, those subsidies have to exclude religious institutions. This is all leftist fanaticism that has been imposed on the Constitution. It's not what the Constitution says, and it's not even what a kind of normal reading of the Constitution would suggest. Now, there's a case that just went before the Supreme Court. The hearing is already over. And these hearings are just fun to watch. I don't often watch them live. I'll follow up by reading about the comments from the different justices. The level of just intelligent interrogation is really what is a pleasure to observe. This case is called Carson versus Macon. Basically, there's a law in Maine which says that if you don't live near a public school, if you do, you have to go to your public school. But if you don't live near a public school, then you can claim a subsidy from the state that allows you to get transportation to go to the nearest public school if you want. So you can contract to go to the nearest public school, and the state subsidy helps you to do that. Or you can go to a private school. You can use the state subsidy to pay for the private school educational services. Now, Maine decided this applies to private schools, but it doesn't apply to religious schools. Religious schools are excluded from this subsidy. And of course, in defending itself, Maine invokes the Establishment Clause. The government is not allowed to, quote, establish religion, as if extending a subsidy that's given to other students and that allows you to go to private schools in the first place, as if the No Establishment Clause requires the government to exclude religious schools. This is the left's position. It's also the state of Maine's position. And Maine Deputy Attorney General Christopher Taub argues this case on behalf of Maine. Now, on the other side, you have religious freedom attorneys, including our buddy Kelly Shackelford from First Liberty, arguing in favor of these families that want to send their kids to a religious school. And it's very clear from the justices' remarks. And by the way, we're talking about all the 6 justices, Republican nominees, including John Roberts. It seems very clear that they have no patience for the left's nonsense in this case. But it's also the way that they argue that I think makes this so interesting. By the way, there is an important precedent. The left is always talking about, you got to respect precedent. Well, it turns out that there is a precedent. The precedent is called Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, 2002, in which case the Supreme Court basically said that you can have a private school choice program that includes religious schools. Here's Justice Roberts, I'm quoting him. A state need not subsidize private education, meaning they don't have to subsidize it. But he goes, but once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they are religious. So what you're getting at here is the heart of the matter. Basically, what Justice Roberts is saying is you cannot discriminate against religious schools. If you're offering a subsidy to private schools, it's got to go to private schools of the parent's choice. And that would include, let's say, not just a Baptist school or a Catholic school, but quite frankly, even an Islamic school. Now, the case goes before the Supreme Court, this case, the Maine case, And the justices are really good in probing the issue very effectively. And here's Kavanaugh. The exclusion of religious people and religious institutions from public benefits solely because they are religious is itself discriminatory. So for Kavanaugh, this appears to be an open and shut case. Amy Coney Barrett makes a subtle point. She says, wait a minute, you keep talking about how these religious values, the government can subsidize religious values. She goes, well, don't secular schools have some sense of values that they teach? Why should we privilege those values over the religious values? Sam Alito, he says, what if there's a private school that is inculcating a kind of secular, purely materialistic view of life? That's a philosophy. That's, you could argue, a religion. That's certainly a moral code. He goes, do you think that the main subsidy will allow parents? Of course, they can send their kids to that school. So why is it the case that a purely materialistic view of life is acceptable, but evidently a religious view of life is not? And who assigned the state of Maine the right to make these kinds of judgments about the good life? To decide this is the good life, that's not the good life. So what you see here, and of course, Maine is trying to constantly duck out of this by saying, well, and then here's Alito. He goes, what if you have a private school that teaches critical race theory? And that's all they teach. Are parents allowed to send their kids to that school? Obviously, yes, because they're a private school and they can teach pretty much whatever they want. Well, isn't critical race theory a philosophy? Doesn't it embody a set of values? Doesn't it, in fact, assign almost religious categories of victimization, you're the perpetrator, guilt, innocence, penitence, or no penitence allowed? Well, if that religious doctrine can be taught in the name of critical race theory, why can't a Baptist school teach Baptist, integrate Baptist teachings into its educational philosophy? Now, Maine, of course, wants to resist this. And of course, in the article in Slate, the guy goes, quote, if this is allowed to continue, he goes, this is going to encourage states all over the country to have these private programs and they're going to be funding religious schools, unquote. It will undermine the premise of public education in America. Fantastic. This is great. What's interesting is that when you listen to the left's warnings, we're so accustomed to, oh, it will undermine public education, as opposed to it will undermine public education. Ha 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 ha. This is exactly what we're looking forward to. Public education has basically become a vehicle for the indoctrination of the left. And the more we can do to undermine public education, I say, the better.